Today we're unraveling the secrets of fractions and time. In this episode, we're going to show you what type of fractions children are introduced in year 1. And before you panic, don't worry, it's only half and a quarter. But we're going to show you what is the main concept that children need to understand when we're speaking of fractions. And of course, how to represent in a numerical form. The second thing we're going to look into is the analog clock. Now, how can we tell time in an analog clock? It's very important. And we're going to show you how children are taught to do that. And as a bonus, if you stick around all the way till the end, you're going to find out what is one of the best games of how to practice fraction and time at the same time with your child at home. Now let's talk about fractions. In year 1, luckily for us, children are introduced only to half and a quarter. Pretty simple. But the element that we need to pay attention to is that the fraction itself represents an absolute equal part of a whole. Now, children were introduced to number composition, where we were dividing the whole, that is, let's say a number 5, and we were partitioning it into different parts. Those parts can represent 1 and 4, or can represent 2 and 3. Now, when we're talking about fractions, however, those parts, they are absolute equal to one another. This is the key moment that we need to pay attention to, and we need to ensure that our children understand quite well. Now, the good thing is practicing fractions, and especially in year 1, half and a quarter, it's done normally through different shapes that are split into equal parts, and they can color in the part that is represented by the fraction. Exercising that is very, very appealing to the children, so you're not going to have any kind of resistance from them. The important element that we need to pay attention to is that although we need to ensure that children understand that the fraction is an absolute half, we have to let them practice what can be split into parts that are not equal parts. So, for example, if we have 6 blocks, those 6 blocks can be split into 2 and 4, but that would not represent a half of the number 6. What will represent a half will be 3 blocks on one end, 3 blocks on the other end. So an exercise like this have different shapes or different objects or different manipulatives. We can use all different kind of exercises to help our child understand that something can be split in 2 or 4 parts. Which parts will be then represented by a fraction? Only the absolute equal parts will be represented by a fraction. The numerical representation of fractions can be slightly tricky, but it's more tricky for us because we're a bit worried about the knowledge that we have and how we're going to convey it to our child rather than for our child to understand. So here are a few examples how you can practice at home the actual numerical representation and what type of wording we can use in order to make everything so much more easier for them to understand. So have a look at this picture. We have a model. We have 1/2 of an apple. What we can say is the apple has been divided into 2 equal parts. And we have one of the parts. So what we need to demonstrate our children is that when we decide on how many parts a whole, in this case an apple, will be divided, the bottom part of the fraction, or the denominator, represent the number of parts there are. The top number, or the numerator, represent how many parts we have at this particular moment. It is very easy for the children, because don't forget, you're not their teacher, so you don't have to teach them how to complete those work. These are exercises that have been practiced within the classroom environment. All you have to do is help your child to be trained to hear and understand what they're hearing, or to read and understand what they're reading and understand what action they need to execute. Another thing, a lot of parents are very worried about terms like denominator and numerator and whether they're not too complicated for your child. Now, if you try to use it once every now and then when you practice with your kid, that should be absolutely enough for them to get used to the word and to understand what exactly it means. What you need to do, however, ensure is that your child understands that the bottom part of the fraction represent the number of parts we have divided that particular whole. So for example, if we have a half of a fraction, that means that we have divided it into 2 parts. If we have a quarter of a fraction, that means we have divided into 4 parts. The top part of the fraction represents how many parts we have at the moment. That's it. You don't need to go any further than this. Now let's talk about time. Naturally, when children are introduced to fractions, they're also introduced to the analog clock and how to be used and how to tell time. Partially because we use half and quarters when we're telling time. For example, 1:30, or 2:45, or 2:15. But have you ever wondered why children at such an early age as year 1 are introduced specifically to the analog clock? Well, I want to show you something. Let's do an experiment. Have a look at these 2 clocks. Looking at them to let me know which one creates in you a sense of urgency, a sense of incredibly short period of time that you need to complete a task, and which one gives you a little bit more methodical, a little bit more calm state of mind. The analog clock provides a tangible representation of a passage of time. So that is one of the main reasons why children need to be introduced to analog clocks. And I would always advise everybody to have at home an analog clock where your child can have a look and not only practice how to tell time, but you will be able to help them develop that sense of time, that understanding that time is something that can be measured, and they will be able to understand what exactly portion of time and how does it feel within the space and the reality that we are living in. And now, as we promised in the beginning of the video, here is a very fun game you can play with your kids where you can practice fractions, but at the same time practice telling time. There is a link in the description of this video where you will be able to download the template that we have created. But please don't feel obliged. You can let your child imagination goes wild and create their own clock. Also, you'll find a set of instructions that will give you a bit of understanding of how the games is set up, games instructions, and of course, a set of challenges that you can start using straight away. The rest you can develop and build up entirely based on what your child likes and what they need to practice in this particular moment. Thank you so much for staying with me today. My name is Dani and I'm here always to assist how to help your child to become a superstar when it comes to such a scary subject like mathematics. Please, if you haven't subscribed already, do click the red button. Don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications, and of course always leave a comment. There will be an example of this game in our community page where we always try to stay connected with you and see what kind of information you require today.